Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. After horrific events disrupted the quiet and unhurried lives of the residents of the tiny town of Maymay in the southern Philippines, Lavella Magid finally received permission from law enforcement to clean her own home, which had been the scene of a terrible crime. As she wiped down the surfaces, she reflected on the fact that not long ago these rooms were filled with prosperity, stability, laughter, and warmth. And then, someone ruthless had cruelly and inhumanely taken the lives of her two children, after which the shadow of tragedy had consumed all familiar life. It wasn't easy for Lavella to touch the pieces of furniture that still held the memories of her children, but cleaning distracted her from the heavy emotions, creating a temporary sense of control at least over the order of the house. And she found in this control a temporary refuge from the emotional pain, because she also has an adopted daughter, Janice, who miraculously managed to survive the terrible massacre, and for whom she must remain strong. In recent days, the grieving mother could only cry, scream, curl up in a ball, and for long hours went deep into herself, although she realized how hard it must be for Janice, who was the only witness to the crime. Reaching her foster daughter's room, Lavella concentrated especially on cleaning. Suddenly, she found an ID card that definitely shouldn't have been in the girl's room. The ID belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Merlin. Lavella immediately went to the police station to report the find. The ID probably belongs to one of the 3 burglars that Janice had previously reported, she said. The police officers listened carefully to the woman, and the ID did indeed go a long way toward bringing the crime closer to being solved. However, they were not at all surprised, as by this point they were pretty sure who, how, and why killed Gwen and Louis Magud on December 10, 2021. On September 22, 2013, long before the events at the Magud's home, a 9-year-old girl, unable to bear the lack of parental love, care, poverty, beatings, and physical hunger, stood on the dock and stared hopelessly into the water. A lonely, quiet child caught the attention of a woman passing by. When asked what she was doing here alone and if she needed help, the girl looked up and quietly replied, "My name is Janice Sable. I have no parents, and for some reason I don't remember anything." The woman decided that the child had suffered some kind of shock that caused her memory loss. Perhaps something terrible had happened to her. The woman took the girl to the nearest police station, where she was assured that the child would be taken care of. Janice was placed in temporary custody, and they tried to find her parents. Time passed. The search yielded nothing. The girl did not remember anything about her life. No one ever reported the child missing, and after a while the girl was officially recognized as an orphan, transferred to the permanent care of the Department of Social Welfare and Development, which in general did not sadden the child at all. For the first time she had plenty of food, clothes, and a lot of friendly attention from adults. As it turned out, Janice did not lose her memory, but the defense mechanisms of the child's consciousness, having experienced so many traumatic events, pushed away the memories of family and home. Being an orphan meant staying in a new and better life. That's what she did. Even then, Janice had her first, not yet fully realized, experience of how to behave so that others would want to help you. Unfortunately, the events of 2013 were not a one-time ticket to a new life, but a mechanism for getting what she wanted. Cruz and Lavelle Magud were known to others as a well-meaning married couple. Cruz worked as a teacher at the local high school while his wife ran an elementary school. The couple raised 2 wonderful children, incredibly intelligent. 18-year-old beauty Gwen participated in all extracurricular activities and was a member of the Girl Scouts. The girl dreamed of a career as a doctor and even, wanting to test herself, enrolled in her last year of high school in a preparatory medical school. 16-year-old Louis became the soul of any company in which he came. He easily made friends, was open, played guitar, sang, and painted. At all, this young man showed extreme responsibility, liked to help everyone, and planned to achieve success in law. Parents were proud of their children, helped them in everything, and supported their plans and desires. The family led a measured life, attended church, and did charity work. At one of the charity events in the church, Gwen and met Janice, where she came as a nanny to look after the children. The girls became instant friends and became best friends overnight. Almost the same age, they were fun and funky. They often posted dance videos on TikTok and came up with interesting ways to spend their time. Louis enjoyed participating in their activities. It didn't take long for all three of them to become best friends. At one point, her brother and sister wondered why Janice was working instead of attending school, and Janice told them that was an orphan. Her parents died of illness when she was very young, so she has had to rely solely on government assistance since she was a child. In order to be able to buy something for herself, she has to work part-time instead of studying. The girl complained that the couple who gave her a job pays very little and the money received is enough only for food and she has to work almost around the clock. Later, Janice repeatedly shared her fears about the future with her new friends. Since she is about to turn 18, she is about to lose some social benefits intended only for minors, and perhaps she will not even have anything to pay for housing. Education and a good career are all but forgotten. Kind-hearted Gwen, heartened by her friend's plight, decided to lend her a helping hand and went to her parents. She told them about the difficult tragic life of a new acquaintance and asked them to adopt Janice so that she had over her head and conditions for studying. She assured the parents that everyone would benefit. Janice would be able to get an education, help share the housework, and help Louis with his homework. The Magauds were skeptical at first. They worked as teachers, their income was low, they could hardly afford another child, and besides there was no extra room in their house for Janice. Louis even volunteered to sleep on the living room couch and gave up his room. The parents couldn't stand their daughter and son's repeated requests and agreed. In July 2021, the Magauds officially adopted Janice. They enrolled her in school and she even took their last name. Janice turned out to be a smart and very polite girl. She accepted all the rules in the house. Cruz and Lavella wanted their children to grow up to be responsible and disciplined people who would know the value of work and money, and so they introduced them to the household. Janice was given exactly the same amount of housework as her sister and brother. The girl gladly performed her share of the duties and always showed respect for her foster parents. To show her gratitude to the family, she would sometimes get up early and cook breakfast for everyone. The couple realized that they had not just helped the girl, as Gwen had asked them to do, but had indeed unexpectedly gained a second daughter, albeit a very old one. At one point, Janice even called them Mom and Dad. On December 10, 2021, at 2:58 in the afternoon, Cruz, who was checking his middle school homework, received a phone call from a neighbor who hurriedly told him, "Go home soon, but don't panic before time." Janice left a strange post on Facebook. "Your house appears to have been burglarized." Cruz immediately put work on hold, called his wife, who was also at work at that moment, and rushed home. On the way, he tried to call his children, but they didn't answer. The worried father drove home at top speed, more worried about the safety of his children than the money in the house. At about 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz pulled up to the house. The door to the house appeared to be locked, so he went to the back door, walked around the house and entered through a second entrance. Everywhere was a mess. Cruz went from room to room and called the kids by name. When he reached the living room, he saw something no parent should ever see. Luis and Gwen were lying on the floor covered in blood. Luis lay in the living room with his hands tied behind his back, a towel stuffed in his mouth and scars all over his body. He found his eldest daughter, Gwen, not far from the bedroom door, her entire body covered in cuts and blood. They were most definitely dead. With a noise in his head on absorbent cotton legs, Cruz suddenly realized that there had to be a third person in the house. He started screaming as hard as he could, "Janice, Janice." At one point, Cruz heard a quiet voice say, "Daddy." Turning around, Cruz was relieved to see that Janice was alive, hugged her, and noticed that her hair was wet. He asked why it was wet, and the girl replied that she had just gotten out of the shower and therefore, because of the water, did not hear his call. Of course, her grief-stricken father thought her answer was strange, but he decided that Janice wanted to wash away the horror she had experienced. After all, many people in shocking situations begin to behave strangely. After making sure she was unharmed, the man called the police. Police arriving on the scene found a hammer, a baseball bat, a knife, and a broken wine bottle near the victims. Under normal circumstances, having more than one means of committing a crime means there is more than one perpetrator. The police turned all of these items over to the appropriate officers, hoping to find fingerprints on them, and proceeded to search the house and collect evidence near and around it. They also advised Cruz and Lovell to carefully examine the items to see what was missing. Very carefully, the officers conducted a detailed interview with Janice, the only survivor. She told them that she and Gwen were in the room, and Lewis was in the living room when they heard screaming and the sounds of a fight. She and Gwen immediately went to check what had happened, and saw two masked robbers hitting Lewis with a hammer and a baseball bat, and a third man with a knife. Terrified at what they saw, they gave themselves away with a muffled shriek. One of the thugs chased after Gwen. According to Janice, he didn't notice her. She took advantage of the moment, ran into the small bedroom, locked the door, and hid under the bed. There she lay in shock, not daring to move. When she came to her senses, she sent a text message asking for help to her mother Lovell, but her mother did not answer. She was afraid to call the police to avoid giving herself away by ringing or the sound of her voice, so 12 minutes after texting her mom, she wrote 2 messages for help on her Facebook page. Help, there are strangers in my house. I can only hide in my room right now. I don't want to die. One of those messages was seen by a neighbor, who called Cruz. 3 days after the terrible event, which struck all residents of the town with its unbearable cruelty, the Philippine police created a special investigative team, including the best staff and specialists. On December 15th, the investigation team said that a large amount of evidence and clues have been collected, and the nature of the case is temporarily classified as robbery and murder, but they do not rule out other versions and will conduct an in-depth investigation. By other theories, the investigation team members meant their growing belief that Janice was the key figure in the crime. Specialists compared evidence from the crime scene and witness statements with Janice's and found several very large discrepancies that allowed them to list the girl as a suspect rather than a witness. First, nothing was missing from the house, which seemed illogical if the 3 bandits were planning a robbery. Cruz and Lovella said that all the valuables and money were in place, despite the fact that the house was turned upside down. Only Gwen's cell phone was missing. Second, the investigation team found a plastic bag containing bloody pants and shirt in a creek near Cruz's home. It was confirmed that the bloodstains on the clothes belonged to the murdered men. It appeared that the perpetrator, or one of the perpetrators, changed into clean clothes after the murder and then fled. That is, he was unusually calm after committing the crime, indicating premeditation and planning. In a robbery that went wrong and ended in multiple murders, the perpetrator would likely have panicked and tried to get away as quickly as possible, rather than waste time searching for clean clothes and changing clothes, especially since the parents of the murdered men did not confirm that any articles of clothing were missing, and it is highly unlikely that the perpetrator would have thrown the bloody clothes into the stream behind the house. Moreover, there were signs at the scene that indicated an emotional crime, not a cold-blooded one. There were too many wounds and fractures found on the bodies of the brother and sister. Gwen even had one ear torn off. Most of the injuries were to her face. The autopsy took 2 full days. Such a scene seems more like anger venting for revenge or jealousy, rather than calculation. The perpetrator was clearly very angry. The nature of the crime clearly indicated a personal grudge killing. Third, according to the forensic medical report, the older sister died before the younger brother, which contradicted Janice's testimony, because according to her, the younger brother was attacked first, and with as many wounds as Janice described, it was unlikely that he could have outlived his sister, who had been bleeding for quite some time. Fourthly, the murder weapons were the property of the family. The perpetrators did not bring them with them. The hammer belonged to the head of the family, and he kept it in the laundry room drawer. Cruz was sure that only his eldest daughters, Gwen and Janice, knew where the hammer was kept. A baseball bat found at the scene, according to the parents' testimony, belonged to their youngest son, who kept it on the second tier of the bed, under a blanket. Burglars who are suddenly caught in the act don't run around the house looking for a hammer and bat, stored in non-obvious places. They either bring their own murder weapons or use available items. It turns out the location of the two key tools of this crime were known only to the people living in the house. Cruz and Lavelle had alibis. That leaves Janice, who knew where the hammer and baseball bat were kept. Louis gave her his room, so she was aware of the strange location of the item. So, even if she wasn't the killer, she was probably an accomplice, since the perpetrator wasn't alone. Fifth, when Lavella received a text message from Janice asking for help, she immediately called back, but Janice did not answer, and later said that after not receiving a response from her mother, she published a Facebook post. Dispatch data confirmed Lavelle's call. The Facebook post, quite long and with emoticons, somehow did not fit with the behavior of a person afraid to even move. Sixth, shock and panic could not explain taking a shower instead of calling the police. A person is usually most vulnerable in the shower, plus the water muffles the sounds of approaching footsteps. So why did Janice shower and wash her hair while she claimed she was afraid of the three unknown men? Since they might not have left? If Janice had no doubt that the burglars were already gone, and wasn't afraid to give herself away by making noises, then why didn't she call the police before taking a shower? Well, and most importantly, the autopsy revealed that Gwen and Louis passed away around 2 p.m., which meant Janice waited about 48 minutes to start texting her foster mom and waited an hour to post on Facebook. The room she hid in was ransacked. It seemed the perpetrators had scrutinized every corner of the small room, but hadn't noticed Janice. How could that be? By the time Lavelle entered the police station with Merlin's ID, the investigation team had already received the lab report. Janice's fingerprints had been found on the hammer and baseball bat used as the murder weapons. Of course, the implements could have had the prints of the people living in the house, but given the other inconsistencies, she was the prime suspect. Janice was brought to the station for formal questioning on December 18th. She was told about the ID she had found, the results of the forensic examination, and all the inconsistencies. Unexpectedly for the detectives, Janice immediately confessed to the crime. She revealed that she and Merlin had killed Gwen and Louis. Shortly after the confession, Janice and Merlin were arrested. Gwen's cell phone, the only missing item from the crime scene, was found in the young man's belongings. Both young men were charged with first-degree murder and sent to juvenile detention without bail. It is still unknown how Janice and Merlin met and what their relationship was. It is only known that Merlin was the same age as the girl and worked in the church, preparing everything necessary for church services. The young people were friends on Facebook. Having studied their correspondence, investigators learned that they planned to kill Gwen and Louis since December 1st. That is, 10 days before the tragedy. Cruz and Lovella were distraught and could hardly believe what was happening. Janice had always seemed so quiet and well-mannered. They kindly took her in and treated her like their own daughter, and their children loved the girl like a sister. Why? Why did she do such a thing? Why? Janice attributed it to envy of Gwen. A well-to-do family, loving parents, she resented why she never got what Gwen got effortlessly. In her opinion, the adoption was nothing more than cheap sympathy, and a way for family members to validate themselves at the expense of her difficult life. I felt like a stray dog that had been picked up. If the McGods had known how Janice really felt, they would have tried to help her understand, but they didn't. Janice skillfully hid everything behind niceness, and she didn't make breakfast out of gratitude, but felt obliged to do so. Janice was very angry about all the housework the McGods made her do, believing them to be hypocrites and treating her like a servant rather than a daughter. As soon as the news of Janice's confession became known, there was an uproar in the town. All the residents could not believe that a 17-year-old orphan girl had committed such a brutal crime. People began to compare her to the heroine of the movie Orphan, because of which the number of adoptions had already dropped once. As the uproar continued to grow, the investigative team looked into Janice's past and found her mother and two younger brothers. Turns out Janice wasn't an orphan. When she was very young, her family lived in great poverty. Her father gambled and spent all the family money on gambling. The family was almost constantly starving. In 2013, the girl ran away from home, standing on that pier. She accepted the help of a concerned woman out of desperation. Having received food, care, and warmth almost for the first time in her life, She realized that the best solution would be never to remember her parents and brothers again. Her family wasn't looking for her. The lack of an extra mouth only made their lives easier, and there was no money for searching. Perhaps her mother secretly hoped that her daughter was in circumstances. Since then, Janice realized that pretending to be an orphan is profitable, so you can get sympathy, food, and clothes instead of hunger and beatings, and she can hardly be blamed for that conclusion. Since discovering the truth about the difficult childhood, the motive has become clearer. No one could have imagined the extent to which a traumatized and possibly mentally unstable child would be adopted by the Magid family. In telling Gwen about her difficult life and the imminent lack of payments and housing, Janice had absolutely counted on an invitation to stay at her friend's house. She was used to playing on sympathy, was ready to pay for cleaning and looking after Louis, but the girl hardly expected that the Magid family would go so far as to adopt. It opened up numerous childhood traumas. All her time in the Magid family had been spent the normal lives of other children, longing for such a life, feeling her own inferiority, abandonment, and carefully constructed psychological defense mechanisms. She was used to surviving and knew well how to do it, and suddenly she had it all, everything she'd ever dreamed of. Having never seen enough care and love from her relatives, she didn't know how to accept such care, and didn't understand how one could feel well-being. In her new family, it became difficult for her to accept kindness as something natural. She was constantly looking for a catch. She experienced the usual fear for the future, but did not find it reflected in reality. The care and love her adopted daughter received was filtered through her own experiences and emotional wounds. Instead of reassurance, Janice felt tension. She didn't know how to be a daughter, but she knew how to be a hired worker. With the allotted amount of tasks, she explained to herself what was happening. What this house really wanted was a free worker, not a daughter. Everyone was just playing noble and reveling in their charity. Tension began to turn into hatred and a desire for revenge for being treated like a picked-up stray dog. The better the family treated Janice, the more resentment grew in her heart of hearts. She felt like a stranger and was jealous of Lavelle and Gwen. The more love Lavelle showed her daughters, the more jealousy Janice felt. Unable to deal with such emotions, love and care turned into a source of fear and hatred. She experienced rage and frustration, feeling even more inferior and misunderstood. This distorted perception became a breeding ground for a desire for revenge against those who she felt had simply taken advantage of her trust. Numerous studies of child psychology emphasize the importance of psychological support for children who have experienced difficult periods and emotional trauma, especially in the adoption process. But unfortunately, no one guessed about Janice's past and the emotional traumas she had experienced. The desire to help the orphaned girl turned into a nightmare for the Magud family, ruthless and irreparable. Gwen and Louise were buried in a private cemetery on December 20th, 2021. More than 1,000 people attended the funeral and all expressed their grief. Janice and Merlin were tried separately, but the young men received identical sentences, 32 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When they get out of prison, they will be in their 50s and still have a whole life ahead of them that Gwen, Louise, Cruz, and Lovell will now not have. A horrific crime has shattered the Magud family forever. Their act of kindness has been rewarded in the most horrific way imaginable. After surviving the horror, it's very difficult to remain kind and strong. But Cruz and Lovella succeeded. In August 2022, the couple opened a restaurant in honor of their fallen children that serves their favorite dishes. The couple are undergoing psychotherapy and plan to use their business to keep the memory of Gwen and Louise alive. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. On an early August morning in 2015, emergency services received a call. Tom Martins, the caller, urgently reported a violent altercation involving his daughter and son-in-law. "He's bloodied and I fear I might have killed him," Tom revealed with a shaken voice. In response, the dispatcher quickly mobilized medical support. The phone was then passed to Tom's distraught daughter, skilled in CPR. The dispatcher calmly instructed, "Stay composed, rely on your training, not emotions. We need to revive your husband. Ready to start CPR? Meanwhile, first responders rushed to the upscale neighborhood in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They arrived at a $350,000 home, noted for its stylish gray shutters and well-maintained lawns, only to find Jason Corbett brutally murdered. This incident unfolds a tragic narrative of a widower with 2 young children, who was in dire need of emotional support after losing his cherished wife. It also introduces a young woman, seeming like a beacon of hope, who stepped in to care for the children. Yet, it serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of hastily integrating almost strangers into close-knit family bonds. If Jason had been fully aware of Molly's mental health background, and had known her more intimately, he might have reconsidered her close involvement with his kids. For Molly, meeting Jason symbolized a fresh start, complete with a loving family and the children she always dreamt of. However, for Jason, this relationship tragically became a one-way journey with no return. Molly Martin's life was the epitome of the American dream. Born into a wealthy and educated white family, she enjoyed a prosperous upbringing in Farragut, Tennessee. Her early years were spent in a luxurious mansion, where she was the cherished little princess. Neighbors recall her as a reserved, somewhat introverted girl, who was an adept swimmer despite frequent health-related absences from school. With the family's move to the more lavish Fox Run area, Molly continued her education at Farragut High School, participating in the swim team. Though not as skilled as her peers, Molly still felt like a champion in her own world. Molly's mother, Sharon, a math doctorate from the prestigious Emory University in Georgia, and her father, Tom, an FBI agent and seasoned lawyer, instilled a family motto: success is measured only by achievements, regardless of whether they were real or perceived. The Martinses were known as pillars of society, a family striving for prestige, wealth, and perfect heirs, ready to continue their lifestyle. From a young age, the children were raised with a win-at-all-costs mentality. The main issue was that Molly, the beloved daughter and little princess, didn't live up to these high expectations, unlike her 2 brothers. To maintain their societal facade, Tom and Sharon went to great lengths to conceal why. Molly was perceived as frequently ill, with a supposed issue in her left foot causing her pain and requiring numerous hospitalizations and surgeries. In reality, it wasn't a physical ailment that kept Molly from school, but her mental health. To preserve their external image, Tom and Sharon kept their daughter's issues within the family, with few knowing what happened behind the closed doors of their luxurious mansion. Thanks to her parents' influence, Molly seemingly secured a spot at Clemson, one of America's top colleges. In 2003, her photograph appeared in the Clemson University yearbook as a freshman, but then records of her disappeared. In 2004, Molly began working at the Visage Beauty Salon in Knoxville, where she met stylist Jeremy Taylor. The two started dating and spent a year and a half together. Despite their closeness, Taylor only knew about Molly's leg health issues, necessitating numerous surgeries and often preventing her from working. Yet, he admired her dancing and ballet talents, never questioning the intense strain on her foot. After breaking up with Taylor, Molly joined a dating site where she started a romantic correspondence with Keith McGinn. On February 22, 2007, nearly a year before meeting the widowed father of 2, Keith and Molly went on their first date. It was to Keith that Molly first revealed her bipolar disorder and some other accompanying issues. Keith, who suffered from chronic fatigue and depression himself, supported her and moved in with her a month later. Molly found work as a nanny, attended therapy, and things seemed to be going well. The fairy tale ended when she contracted a severe staph infection. The medication for the infection interfered with her bipolar medication, leading to a drastic change in her behavior. According to Keith, at one point, Molly was taking 16 pills prescribed by her psychiatrist daily, plus an additional 10 as needed. Most of these were for her bipolar disorder and manic depressive psychosis. Molly stopped sleeping, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. In a bid to save their relationship, Molly decided to get pregnant. She always said that children would make her happy, Keith later revealed in an interview. Eventually, she got pregnant. I was terrified because I knew how many medications she was on. I was really scared. On September 16, 2007, Molly miscarried early in the pregnancy. Keith recalled, "She was devastated, but honestly, I was relieved. I thought it was for the best." 5 months later, in February 2008, with no improvement in her condition, Molly was admitted to a psychiatric unit in a medical rehabilitation center in Atlanta, Georgia. Her parents paid for the treatment. A few days after her discharge, she told Keith, "I want to go work as a nanny somewhere in Europe." He took it as a sign of her relapsing and didn't think much of her online advertisement seeking a nanny position. However, she soon informed him that she had found a job in Ireland and would be leaving for a while. Her advertisement was answered by Jason Corbett, unaware of the future nanny's troubles. Jason Corbett was born on February 12, 1976, in Limerick, Ireland. He grew up in a happy and caring family. His parents, John and Rita, raised 8 children, including Jason's twin brother, Wayne. The family valued emotional richness over material wealth, and despite financial struggles after their father lost his job, they strived to provide a nurturing environment for the children. To help out, Jason took a part-time job as a security guard at a school sports center. He was eager to earn money to delight his loved ones. Work ethic and the desire to support those around him were always important values for Jason, making him a favorite among family and friends. Margaret Fitzpatrick, or simply Meg, was one of those who had a deep affection for Jason. Right after meeting, they knew they were meant for each other. Married, they eagerly started planning a family, both desiring a large, happy household. In September 2004, they welcomed their first child, Jack, and 2 years later, their daughter Sarah was born. Meg and Jason felt true happiness raising their little ones, deeply loving each other and their children, and everything in their life seemed perfect. However, this idyllic life came to an abrupt end. On November 21, 2006, just 3 months after Sarah's birth, tragedy struck. Meg woke up with an asthma attack and, despite medical intervention, passed away in the hospital. Her death left 30-year-old Jason in profound grief. In his loneliness and sorrow, only his love for his children kept him afloat. His relatives supported him, understanding the importance of being there for him during this difficult time. Humble and kind, Jason felt uneasy about relying so much on his family for help and childcare. This thought troubled Jason. He didn't want to be a burden, although his family never saw him that way. In 2007, he decided to hire a housekeeper. The first candidate, a Czech woman, didn't click with Jason, so he let her go. Then he hired a Spanish woman, but the language barrier posed problems. Both women were looking for temporary work, not willing to stay in Ireland long-term, which frustrated Jason, who sought a reliable long-term helper. He eventually concluded that the best solution would be to find an English-speaking nanny seeking long-term employment. In early February 2008, he emailed 20-year-old Molly Martins. She sent a resume that, as it would later emerge, contained inaccuracies. Molly claimed she had graduated from Clemson University, although she had actually dropped out. She also stated she had been approved as a foster parent, which was not true. She made no mention of her recent psychiatric hospitalization or her mental health issues. Jason thought he had finally found the nanny he was looking for. The prospective housekeeper agreed to move to Ireland and care for the children. She was living in Knoxville, Tennessee, and flew to Ireland on March 10, 2008. The plan hit a snag right away. At customs, Molly faced difficulties due to her one-way ticket, raising issues with immigration services. She couldn't explain how long she would stay in the country and didn't have a work visa. However, she managed to resolve these issues and was allowed entry. After living in Ireland for 2 weeks, the cheerful American called Keith and informed him that she wouldn't be returning. They broke up over the phone. The children, Sarah and Jack, quickly grew fond of their new nanny and loved her. Jason was happy to see life stabilizing. Molly took good care of the children, giving Jason peace of mind. Over time, their relationship grew closer, and Jason started inviting the nanny out on dates. Jason and Molly, who began their relationship under unusual circumstances, faced challenges. The initial honeymoon phase quickly gave way to reality. However, Jason, recognizing the situation's imperfections, reassured himself with Molly's skillful interaction with his children. The couple got engaged in 2010. Jason loved his new partner, and importantly, he believed his children had also grown to love the caring Molly. After their engagement, Molly suggested moving to America, longing for her homeland. Understanding that the children would miss Molly, Jason agreed. A year later, he transferred to a factory in Lexington, North Carolina, and sold his house in Ireland. That same year, they married in a grand ceremony in Molly's hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee. Molly's father, Tom Martins, walked her down the aisle, while little Jack and Sarah played the roles of ring bearer and flower girl. Jason bought a luxurious home in a popular neighborhood, complete with an 18-hole golf course, club, pool, tennis courts, playgrounds, and parks. He paid $58,350 in cash for the house. The peculiarities began during the wedding celebration itself. For some reason, Molly told her friends that she and Meg, Jason's first wife, had been friends before Meg died of cancer. However, Meg had passed away in 2006, when Molly was not acquainted with Jason and couldn't have known his wife. Meg's death was due to a respiratory illness, not cancer. Regrettably, the happy groom didn't pay much attention to these conversations. Years passed, and the family continued their life in North Carolina. Jason joined the local golf club and became active in the community, while Molly worked as a swimming coach. Men were drawn to Jason for his friendliness, and women admired Molly's baking skills and supermodel figure. They appeared to be the perfect couple, an attractive and sociable husband, a well-groomed and athletic wife. They were the most in-love couple you ever saw, always holding hands, always kissing and laughing. They just seemed very, very happy, a neighbor would later say. Molly had been conditioned since childhood to maintain a prestigious facade for the public, no matter what was happening behind closed doors. In reality, the marriage was fraught with difficulties. Jason resisted Molly's persistent attempts to adopt his two children. While it seemed a normal desire for a woman who had stepped into the role of mother, her insistence became so intense and obsessive that it started to frighten Jason. According to his sister, Molly convinced neighbors she was the biological mother of the children, and even described her pregnancy with Sarah to acquaintances. The couple constantly argued over the adoption issue. Jason felt unhappy, longing for his home, missing his friends, and the warm family evenings with his brothers and sisters. He seriously considered divorce and returning to Ireland with his son and daughter, which he honestly discussed with Molly. Her reaction was immediate and intensely emotional. After the argument, Jason even hid the children's passports, fearing that Molly might dispose of them to prevent their departure. The more he contemplated divorce, the more desperately she tried to keep him and the children with her. Jason lost his zest for life and began to gain a significant amount of weight, which infuriated his young wife. A husband with excess weight disrupted their perfect public image. The night before the murder, the couple attended a dinner at a neighbor's house, where Molly loudly criticized the amount of food on Jason's plate in front of all the guests. She openly stated that it was unacceptable for someone of his weight to eat so much. Jason left silently. The following night, August 2, 2015, Molly and her father beat Jason to death. On August 1st, Molly's parents, Tom and Sharon, arrived in North Carolina for a visit. The exact purpose of this visit remains a mystery to this day. Some believe Molly and her father pre-planned the visit to ensure Tom was present to assist in committing the crime, while others see it as a routine parental visit. Since Tom and Sharon arrived late in the evening, they decided to give the gifts they brought for the children the next morning. This detail is crucial. They had prepared an aluminum baseball bat for Jack and were planning to give Sarah a tennis racket. After dinner, Tom and Sharon retired to the guest bedroom in the basement. Molly and Jason went to their bedroom on the first floor, and the children went upstairs to their respective rooms on the second floor. According to Molly, Sarah woke her up at 3 a.m. after a nightmare. Molly calmed her down and took her back to bed. By the time she returned, Jason, she claimed, was awake and furiously angry, leading to a fight that ultimately resulted in his death. As the supposed altercation began, Tom, a former FBI agent, allegedly heard strange noises from his daughter and son-in-law's bedroom. Concerned, he grabbed the baseball bat intended for Jack and headed to the room. Upon entering, he claimed to see Jason choking Molly. Jason, noticing his father-in-law, tightened his grip and dragged Molly to the bathroom, threatening to kill her. Tom pleaded with Jason to release Molly, but seeing his requests were futile, he intervened to save his daughter. Tom stated that his initial bat strike didn't stop Jason from strangling Molly, so he continued to hit him. Eventually, Jason released Molly, attempting to grab the bat. A struggle ensued, with Jason wrenching the bat away and knocking Tom to the floor. Tom claimed Molly, in a state of extreme fear, grabbed a brick from the bedside table and struck Jason on the head. Both father and daughter, fearing for their lives, continued to attack the enraged man until they realized he was no longer a threat. By calling the rescue service, Tom described the incident as a fight where his son-in-law had assaulted his daughter, and now Jason urgently needed help. However, when emergency services arrived, the scene indicated something far more brutal than simple self-defense. The bedroom walls and floor were drenched in blood, with splatters also on the ceiling and furniture. Jason's skull was so shattered that pieces of his scalp were scattered across the floor. The medical examiner noted in the report that the number of blows was impossible to determine, as pieces of skull fell onto the table during the autopsy. The first responding police officers noted a stark discrepancy between Jason Corbett's horrific injuries and the fact that both father and daughter were unscathed, their clothes intact. Not even Molly's thin bracelet was broken, despite her claim of a life-and-death struggle. Another key observation: some emergency responders noticed blood on the brick, and Jason's body began to dry out and he was cold to the touch, indicating a significant period of time before the emergency call was made. And why would someone keep a brick on their nightstand? Detectives questioned its presence in the bedroom. Molly explained she planned to paint the brick with the children, and was examining it before bed, thinking about the design. The case hinged on appearances, the external details and testimonies of those involved. During questioning, Molly confessed she had endured years of severe abuse from her husband, keeping silent for fear of losing the children. She said she consulted lawyers who advised collecting evidence of abuse for a custody battle, leading her to plant recording devices around the house. She presented these recordings to the detectives. Tom claimed during questioning that Jason had repeatedly physically abused Molly. However, the investigation found no evidence of physical abuse during Molly's life with Jason. At the trial, the defense insisted on self-defense. Jason Corbett was portrayed as a drinking, violent man who emotionally and physically abused his family. The defense even found people suggesting he might have killed his first wife, Meg. The family doctor testified about Jason's complaints of mood swings. He felt he was getting angry recently without reason. Social workers interviewed the children. Jack and Sarah said their father was always angry and even hurt their mother. The prosecution presented expert reports, indicating that while the audio recordings made by Molly showed Jason's temper, they did not evidence physical violence. Toxicology reports also found traces of a psychiatric medication prescribed to Molly in Jason's blood, suggesting this may have caused his mood irregularities. Jason's family, who knew him as a calm and kind man, were shocked by the defense's claims and insisted that Molly fabricated the story and likely drugged him with illegal drugs to cause behavioral instability for her records. A bloodstain pattern analyst called by the prosecution testified that the blood spatter trajectory did not match a self-defense scenario. The attack on Jason began while he was getting up, and he was defenseless, lying face down when he was repeatedly struck. In 2017, Molly and Tom were found guilty of murder and sentenced to 20 to 25 years each in prison. They filed an appeal a week later and eventually succeeded in getting the North Carolina Supreme Court to overturn their second-degree murder conviction in 2021, leading to a new trial. They were released on $200,000 bail, leaving Davidson County Jail within an hour of each other. In October 2023, father and daughter made a plea deal for involuntary manslaughter. During the November trial, statements from Jason Corbett's now-grown children, Jack and Sarah, living with their aunt in Ireland, were heard. 17-year-old Sarah Corbett stated that defense witnesses and attorneys distorted her words when she was 8 to aid Molly Corbett and Tom Martins in obtaining lighter prison sentences. Molly Martins taught me to shoplift, vomit, and lie. She used to hit my brother and starve him. When I was just 5, she told me my father killed my mother. I really loved Molly, and she manipulated me. Jack Corbett confessed in his statement that he lied to investigators when he was 10. I lost so much of myself since that day. My words were used as a weapon to help Molly and Thomas avoid punishment for killing my father. I never saw my father harm Molly. He was a loving and honorable man, and they did everything to tarnish his good name. While my friends enjoy parties, I'm in therapy, learning to live with the fact that I lied and helped them get away. The children asked Judge Hall to sentence Molly Corbett and Thomas Martins to the maximum 25 years. Perhaps their plea deal helped them avoid this sentence. In November 2023, father and daughter were sentenced to a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 6 years, with credit for the 44 months already served. They were also ordered to avoid contact with the Corbett family. Thomas Martin's lawyer expects his client to be released in 7 months. Sarah, with her Aunt Tracy's help, wrote and published a series of children's books aimed at helping kids cope with loneliness after losing a loved one. Jack became a singer, songwriter, and skilled rugby player. Both siblings continue to fight for justice in their father's case. On December 18, 2013, a young woman named Brianna Worland was abruptly awakened by an unexpected phone call at 1:45 in the morning. She picked up the phone to find her best friend Heather on the other end, sobbing. Heather shared a recent conversation she had with Sydney, her ex-lover. Sydney had called her, revealing that he had split from his wife, expressing regret over their own breakup and asking Heather to start over again. Brianna, curious, asked why Heather even answered his call. It turned out that the number was unknown, prompting Heather to pick up. After listening and slightly calming her friend down, Brianna insisted that Heather had only recently overcome the difficulties of their breakup and shouldn't get involved with Sydney again. She persuaded Heather to go back to sleep and rest, and they said their goodbyes. The picturesque Horry County in South Carolina is often considered an ideal place to live. This region is famous for its beautiful beaches, among which Myrtle Beach stands out for its beauty and popularity. Besides the beaches, one can enjoy dense forests, expansive rivers, and numerous friendly towns. On December 19th, local police in Horry County discovered an abandoned car, a green Dodge Intrepid, parked in a secluded and remote area along the Waccamaw River. The area, known as Peachtree Landing, was about 8 miles from Myrtle Beach. This spot was used as a dock for small boats and was at the end of a long, lesser-known road seldom traveled by cars. The police checked the car's registration in their system and found it was registered to Terry Elvis. Officers were dispatched to his residence. When they knocked on his door and informed him about the found car, Terry was at home watching TV on his living room sofa. It turned out that the car belonged to his daughter, Heather. Terry tried to contact Heather by phone, but she was unreachable. He agreed to accompany the police to Peachtree Landing to investigate further. Upon seeing his daughter's car in such a strange, secluded location, Terry was surprised but initially not overly worried about his daughter. He assumed that the car might have been stolen, as it was odd that it was there without its owner. After receiving a spare key from Terry, the police opened the car and thoroughly inspected it. They found no personal belongings in the cabin, including Heather's purse, keys, or mobile phone. Terry's concern grew, and he tried to contact Heather again. Still not receiving a response, he called the restaurant where she worked. The manager informed him that Heather hadn't shown up for work and was not scheduled until the next day. Realizing something was amiss, Terry informed the police of his concerns, stating that such behavior was completely out of character for his daughter and that something must have happened. At the time, the car and the riverbank where it was found were not considered a crime scene, as there were no signs of a struggle, broken glass, or blood. Nevertheless, authorities decided to launch a missing person investigation. Police and volunteers searched the land while divers explored the riverbed. During the search, human remains were found in the forest, but they were identified as belonging to an unknown man, not the missing woman. Investigators, looking for any lead, examined the background of the missing woman. 20-year-old Heather was the daughter of Terry and Debbie Elvis, who lived in the county. She had a close relationship with her parents and younger sister. Heather's father noted that their family had always been united and supportive of each other. Although Heather was independent, she remained close to her father, communicating with him daily by phone. In 2011, after graduating from St. James High School, Heather announced to her family that she wanted to move in with her best friend, Brianna Whirlman. Her parents fully supported this decision. At 20, Heather worked as a waitress at the Tilted Kilt, a Scottish-themed restaurant in Myrtle Beach, and aspired to become a cosmetologist. Her younger sister Morgan shared that Heather's passions included makeup, working in front of the camera, and she was known for her creativity and ambition. Heather was also popular in her town for her kind, carefree, and positive nature. Her friend Brianna noted that when people remember and talk about her, they smile because she was always a bright personality. Another friend described Heather as sociable, freedom-loving, and life-enjoying. She always sought to live life to the fullest. In 2013, Heather had been living for a year with her best friend Brianna in Myrtle Beach. She was doing well in her studies, and life seemed wonderful. However, everything changed when a chance encounter at the Tilted Kilt set Heather on a path leading to tragedy. On a warm June afternoon, Heather was working the day shift at a busy restaurant. While chatting with customers, taking orders, and carrying trays into the kitchen, she ran into 37-year-old Sidney Moore, a father of 3 and a handyman. Sidney had a small kitchen appliance repair business in Myrtle Beach, and he had gotten an order from the restaurant that day. They struck up a conversation, and Heather felt an instant attraction to the man. From that day on, their interactions became more frequent. They found that they shared many of the same interests and hobbies. Heather even hinted at her feelings on Twitter, writing that she was attracted to older men. By the end of July, Heather began posting intimate messages addressed to Sidney, who was renovating her restaurant. She also talked about Sidney to her friends and coworkers, revealing that he was the same guy from her Twitter posts. Sidney liked Heather's attention and began showing up at the restaurant regularly. They often entertained in the kitchen while Sidney worked on appliance repairs. By July, their relationship had probably evolved from innocent flirting to something more serious, as evidenced by 2 tweets Heather posted within a minute of each other. In one tweet, she mentioned that she had done something, and in the other tweet, she wrote that she was too deep to stop. Most of Heather's co-workers knew of her affection for 37-year-old Sidney and began gossiping about their affair. One co-worker later admitted that everyone knew about their relationship and disapproved of it because Sidney was a married man. Moreover, they often called Heather different names and once decided to play a joke on her. 2 colleagues called the restaurant, pretending to be Tammy, Sidney's wife. In August, the rumors were finally confirmed. Sidney began to appear more often in the restaurant, constantly brought Heather coffee and sweets, sat in the dining area, or waited for her at the back door after her shift, so they could leave together. The couple often shared details of their relationship with friends, and Sidney went so far as to tell acquaintances about his plans to hire Heather as a full-time nanny when he and his wife moved to Florida. Heather also told her friends about Sidney's plans, and everyone thought it was weird. The lovers were constantly on the phone, and often traveled to remote and secluded places in their cars for close calls. It was obvious that this relationship was toxic to Heather. Sidney constantly assured her that he was tired, dissatisfied with his wife, and wanted to leave her, but apparently these were only empty promises. All of Heather's friends warned her that Sidney was just using her. By mid-September, Heather seemed to realize the situation she was in. On September 21st, she tweeted, "Once an angel and a demon fell in love, but it didn't lead to a good outcome." Perhaps that was the day she tried to break her strange bond with Sidney. The decisive moment came when 34-year-old Tammy, Sidney's wife of 34 years, finally found out about her husband's secret affair. She called Heather and began humiliating her over the phone. Brianna, Heather's roommate, witnessed the conversation and later told investigators that Heather endured the insults for a long time. At one point, Tammy claimed that Sydney was only using Heather for his fantasies and even had Sydney tell her personally over the phone. Sydney echoed his wife's words, telling Heather that she means nothing to him and is an easy target. Naturally, this emotionally shook the girl. Sydney and Tammy made her feel terrible and practically destroyed her identity. Prosecutor Chris Helms later determined that Tammy had been in a commanding position in the Moore household, dictating where and when Sydney should work and controlling all of his actions. Helms also noted that Tammy was furious at the betrayal and could not forgive Sydney and Heather, so she decided to ruin the young woman's life. After the truth was revealed, Tammy began handcuffing Sydney and tying him to the bed at night, so he couldn't leave while she slept. She also changed the password on his phone and made him get a tattoo of her name on his stomach. Sydney agreed to all of this in hopes of saving his marriage and family. According to Brianna, Tammy's attacks did not stop at phone calls, but escalated into systematic acts of hate. Tammy began making constant phone calls to Heather's work, demanding that she be fired. She continued to call Heather from Sydney's phone and send pictures and videos of the two of them together, including during intimate encounters. Heather wrote Sydney a letter begging him to get Tammy to stop this harassment, as it was causing problems at her job. Saddened and upset by the way the man she loved had treated her, Heather did everything she could to get her life back on track, even starting to attend church with her best friend. In early November, Tammy sent Heather new threatening messages, demanding that Heather give her her address. Tammy warned that if Heather did not comply, she would find her anyway, and the consequences would be severe. Tammy also stated that she had been watching Sydney since January 2012, and that Heather could no longer influence him. By this point, Heather was completely exhausted both physically and emotionally, and couldn't understand why Tammy wouldn't leave her alone, especially since her relationship with Sydney was long over, and she wanted to forget everything that had happened. Heather told her friend that Tammy seemed to be obsessed with her. By the end of November, more than 2 weeks after receiving Tammy's threatening messages, things finally began to calm down. Sydney and Tammy left for a 3-day trip to California with their 3 children in their new Ford F-150 SUV. With the Moore family out of town, Heather was finally able to relax and enjoy the moment, temporarily free from Tammy's threats. Heather also had a joyous event in her life. She was able to get her dream job at a beauty salon as a makeup artist. She was scheduled to start work before Christmas. Heather was thrilled and happily shared the news with all her friends and family. However, fears began to surface in her life that could only exacerbate her problems with Tammy. In early November, Heather and her co-workers at Tilted Kilt noticed that she had suddenly gained weight in a very short period of time. Heather became concerned and worried that she might be pregnant with Sydney's baby. Upset and scared, she decided to take a pregnancy test at the restaurant. Her manager, Jessica Cook, later told police that Heather was desperate about the whole situation and was afraid that Tammy might do something terrible to her. However, the test turned out to be faulty, and at that point, Heather never found out whether or not she was pregnant with Sydney's child. Heather's best friend also mentioned that when she took a pregnancy test at work in early November, Heather had not been intimate with anyone other than Sydney. Despite worrying about a possible pregnancy in the winter of 2013, Heather was always optimistic. She decided it was time to move forward and make a fresh start. She hoped for a new, happier, and healthier relationship, and agreed to go on a first date with Steve Gerald, a man she had known briefly but was genuinely attracted to. On the evening of December 17th, Heather and Steve met around 10 p.m. and decided to drive around Myrtle Beach to admire the Christmas lights. A little later, they decided to stop at a nearby parking lot, where Steve taught Heather how to drive his manual transmission car. Excited, Heather sent her father a picture of herself behind the wheel of the car with the words, "I just learned to drive like a true professional." Steve later said they arranged a second date, and he dropped Heather off at her Carolina Forest apartment around 1:15 a.m. Detectives had a hard time finding specific clues or leads, so they decided to put together a timeline of events that occurred before Heather's disappearance on December 17th and 18th. The prime suspect was Steve Gerald, with whom Heather had spent the evening before her disappearance. However, after questioning, no evidence of his involvement was found, and suspicions against him were dropped. Heather's family and friends were surprised that while they were doing their best to find the girl, reaching out to the public and offering a reward for information about her whereabouts, Tammy Moore at the same time became active on social media, continuing to insult Heather. This sparked outrage and drew the attention of investigators leading the investigation. On December 20th, after Brianna and her colleagues at the restaurant told police about the affair between Sydney and Heather, detectives called Sydney in for questioning. Throughout the interrogation, Sydney was evasive and reserved, claiming that he was not near Peachtree Landing on the night of December 17, 18. He also claimed that he had no contact with Heather and was on a trip with his wife Tammy at the time. Detectives believed he was lying, but they needed proof. That's when investigators turned their attention to Heather's call history and phone records, and they were finally able to find the first clues. By reconstructing Heather's movements on the day of her disappearance, they tried to determine Sydney's connection to these events. According to Brianna, on December 18th, Heather received a call from an unknown number, a call that lasted only 5 minutes. After that, Heather repeatedly tried to call the number back. Starting at 1:35 a.m., she attempted to dial the number a total of 9 times, indicating her insistence on talking to someone she knew. Police were able to pinpoint the exact location where the call was made from. It was a payphone near a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Surveillance footage confirmed that an unknown male was entering the phone booth at the time Heather received the call. All of this evidence was presented to Sydney, who initially denied making the call, but later admitted that he called Heather to ask her to leave him alone. Tammy Moore was also called in for questioning, where she spoke about her marriage and the situation, but denied any involvement in Heather's disappearance. She also stated that Heather had led an inappropriate lifestyle and called her behavior abnormal. Tammy argued that the problem was not just infidelity, but Heather's behavior in general. Based on these suspicions, detectives decided to check all the security cameras in the neighborhood and quickly uncovered evidence. Shortly before Heather's call, Sydney was captured on video buying a pregnancy test at a local supermarket. When asked who the test was for, the man said it was for his wife. Even more compelling evidence, discovered later, was footage from cameras installed along an isolated stretch of road leading to Peachtree Landing. These tapes showed a Ford F-150, very similar to Sydney's vehicle, driving toward the location where Heather's car was found at 3:36 a.m. and then leaving the area about 10 minutes later. Experts later confirmed that the SUV captured on the footage was indeed Sydney's. He was the last person Heather spoke to, and according to investigators, the last person to see her at Peachtree Landing. Using Heather's phone records, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of her recent movements. At 2:30 a.m., Heather's phone attempted to call the payphone number Sydney was using, but there was no answer. She then headed to Longbeard's Bar and Grill in Carolina Forest, not far from her apartment. She stayed there for about 15 minutes, and then headed toward Augusta Plantation Drive. She then returned to Longbeard's and stayed there for another 15 minutes. Heather tried calling Sydney again, but got no answer, and then went to her apartment where she stayed for 5 minutes. At 3:25 a.m., Sydney's phone received another call, which he answered, and they talked for 4 minutes. At 3:37 a.m., Heather's phone was at Peachtree Landing, from where she made 3 attempts to call Sydney, but all went unanswered. The last attempt to call Sydney was made at 3:41, and by 3:42 the phone was disconnected. Security footage of Sydney's vehicle became incriminating evidence. However, even more compromising evidence was discovered in a search of the Moores' home, conducted after investigators obtained a warrant. Suspiciously, the Moores got rid of their home video surveillance system on December 20th and installed a new one the next day. Although investigators were unable to access footage from the previous system, they seized recordings from the new one. The footage shows Sydney and Tammy Moore thoroughly wiping down the interior of their car and then burning the rags they used to clean it, all on the day the new surveillance system was installed. In 2014, months after Heather Elvis disappeared, police achieved a breakthrough in the case. On February 21st of that year, it was announced that Sydney and Tammy Moore had been arrested on charges of kidnapping Heather. They were later charged with murder as well, even though Heather's body was never found. However, while in jail, the Moores refused to give any testimony. The police continued to search for Heather's body because without it, they did not have enough evidence to bring the felony charges to trial. Eventually, the murder charges were dropped, but the kidnapping charge remained. Heather's mother, Debbie, was disappointed that the charges were dropped, but felt relieved that she would not have to attend the trial and hear the details of what may have happened to her daughter. Heather's family hoped it would encourage potential witnesses to testify. Ultimately, Sidney Moore's 5 months in custody were not the end of it. In 2017, he was found guilty of obstructing justice and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Following this, Sidney and Tammy were to stand trial for the kidnapping of Heather Elvis. The case generated immense public interest and received widespread media coverage. In 2019, 6 years after Heather's disappearance, several lengthy court hearings took place, where numerous witness testimonies, evidence, and proof of the couple's involvement in the crime were presented. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury made their decision and justice was served. Sidney and Tammy Moore were found guilty of kidnapping Heather Elvis. The court sentenced the Moores to 30 years of imprisonment each for their crime and the associated conspiracy. Both husband and wife will serve their terms concurrently. Following the verdict, Sidney requested to speak in the courtroom. Despite the conviction, he desperately continued to assert his innocence. He addressed Heather's parents with understanding and sympathy, stating that their daughter was a wonderful girl and he regretted the tragedy that befell her, being a father himself. He acknowledged that he couldn't undo what had happened between him and Heather, but nothing could change now. Heather's parents gave an interview after the trial, which was extremely difficult for them. They expressed hope that this wouldn't be the end and believed that someday Sidney and Tammy would reveal the truth about the crime. They described their daughter as a bright and sincere girl who suffered at the hands of the deceitful and cruel Moores. On Heather's birthday, her loved ones organized a campaign at the public park where her car was found. Residents of the area brought flowers and donations to the memorial site. The funds raised were directed to a center for missing persons as a tribute to Heather and a way to support her family in their quest to find their daughter and learn the truth. To this day, Heather Elvis's body remains unfound. Her family continues to post missing person announcements every year on her birthday, hoping to attract attention and keep her memory, as well as that of others who have vanished alive. Debbie, Heather's mother, stated she could not find peace until she learns what happened to her daughter. She still hopes that her persistence will help uncover the truth, and that someday someone will tell them what really happened to Heather. The Kaler family case. Can this crime be justified by a nervous disorder? In 1995, Kansas passed a law stating that an offender who committed a premeditated crime could not blame his actions on a mental disorder that made him unable to distinguish right from wrong. This law was passed because almost every criminal, when brought to trial, tried to avoid punishment by claiming that he was not in control of his actions or did not realize the consequences because of a mental disorder. The head of the once happy and large Kaler family tried to use insanity as a defense to avoid responsibility for the atrocities he committed. However, he was found sane. Psychologists believe that his actions were motivated by jealousy, rage, and a desire for revenge against the ex-wife, who left him, and the daughters who supported their mother. Unfortunately, such crimes motivated by jealousy and a pathological desire for revenge are a common worldwide phenomenon. According to statistics, these motives account for 1 in 8 crimes committed. Excessive suspicion, insecurity, and obsessive need to control a partner can turn a person into a real beast who does not spare even his own children. The story of the Kaler family. James Craig Kaler was born in 1963 in Weatherford, Texas. His future wife, Karen Kaler, née White, was born in the same city in 1965. They met in the early 1980s as students at a Texas university. Craig was graduating in engineering, and Karen was a freshman in the humanities department. They quickly found common ground and soon began a romantic relationship. They were young, in love, and seemed like the perfect couple. Craig was a top student known for his determination and talent in engineering. In the late 1980s, after graduation, they had a modest wedding attended only by close friends and family. Their first child, Emily, was born in 1991, followed by Lauren in 1993. They lived in a cozy house in Weatherford and were quite well off by local standards. In 1999, when Karen was pregnant with her third child, Craig received a lucrative job offer at a large utility company in Weatherford. His promotion coincided with the birth of their son, Sean, whom he adored. With a higher income, Craig bought a spacious house in the city's most prestigious neighborhood and a reliable family car. Karen stayed at home, and Craig became the primary breadwinner. Outwardly, the family seemed perfect. The daughters, Emily and Lauren, were talented in sports and music, often participating in vocal competitions and local events. Emily excelled in school and went to a prestigious pharmacy college, while Lauren, an excellent student, dreamed of attending a conservatory to pursue a career in music. Sean was an outgoing, kind, and inquisitive boy, interested in numismatics and aspiring to become an archaeologist. He was very close to his parents and sisters. Craig provided for his family. Karen made the home comfortable, raised the children, and baked tasty treats. They were active in the community, striving to improve their neighborhood. They also raised 3 wonderful and talented children. However, behind the facade of perfection, there were many problems that family members kept hidden. In 2007, Karen admitted to her younger sister, Linda, that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She complained that Craig had been controlling and monitoring her for years, and that this control was increasing. Craig demanded a full accounting of all expenditures, not just major purchases, but everyday household expenses as well. Karen provided him with supermarket receipts, bank transaction data, and reported her whereabouts every day while he was at work. The entire Kaler family lived on a strict schedule set by Craig. When he returned from work, his wife and children had to be home to meet him. They went to bed, woke up, and ate at certain times, and even intimacy between the couple was scheduled. Over time, Craig's obsession with control intensified. He became increasingly demanding and selfish, and Karen's actions were scheduled down to the hour. Karen felt enslaved. She had no free time, only duties and responsibilities. She tried to fulfill all of her husband's demands, hoping that he would loosen his control and they could get back to their old life. But Craig seemed to enjoy his control and was unwilling to change. Linda was deeply disturbed by her sister's revelations. She, like everyone else, had seen Craig as the perfect husband, father, and family man, and it turned out he was a domestic tyrant. However, Karen did not want to destroy her family. Besides, she and her children were financially dependent on Craig. Therefore, she decided to find a job that would provide her with a stable income. Karen's new hobby. Karen, despite her advanced age and 3 children, was in great physical shape. She always adhered to the principles of good nutrition, periodically followed diets, took care of herself, and went jogging every day. Secretly from her husband, she enrolled in a local fitness club, where she started working out for several hours every day. It was her way of blowing off steam, distracting herself, and getting her thoughts in order. She attended the gym while Craig was at work and didn't notice her working out. Soon the management of the sports club noticed the attractive, fit, and diligent woman. Karen was offered to try herself as a fitness instructor with a probationary period and the possibility of an official labor contract. The former housewife could not have dreamed of such an opportunity, because now she will be able to continue doing what she loves, and even receive a decent remuneration for it. Eventually, Craig found out that his wife was going to the gym. Karen expected a scandal and that her husband would forbid her to go, but surprisingly, he reacted calmly. He even seemed pleased that his wife had found something to do and was now earning her own money. His only conditions were that she had to be home when he arrived, cook meals, and not disrupt their planned intimate life. Karen found these conditions acceptable, because now she had the freedom of action and the ability to provide for her own needs without having to justify to her husband every dime she spent. Unexpected romance and a love triangle. Soon there was a new instructor at the fitness club named Sunny Rice. Karen and Sunny quickly hit it off and became friends. For Karen, who had been a stay-at-home mom for many years and was unable to socialize with people outside the family, Sunny became a trusted confidant. The women spent time together at work every day, sometimes going for walks, drinking coffee, and having heart-to-heart talks. It didn't take long for their friendship to grow into something more. Naturally, they hid their feelings and relationship from everyone. But in time, Karen decided that she had to confess everything to her husband. She spent months preparing for this conversation, trying to find the right words, not knowing how to start and what the consequences might be. Eventually, she opened up to Craig. Although Craig was quite puzzled by his wife's revelation, he reacted rather calmly and did not make a scene. However, the next day, Craig stated that he agreed to his wife's relationship with Sunny, but on the condition that he could join them. Karen was shocked by her husband's proposal and didn't know how to react to it. Nevertheless, Craig took the initiative and began courting Sunny, sending her flowers and small gifts. He seemed to see this as an opportunity to brighten his intimate life and add passion and new sensations to his marriage to Karen. At first, the women agreed to his proposal, but soon realized that for Craig it was a game of dominance. Their peculiar love triangle didn't last long, and Craig was made to realize that he was not welcome in their relationship. Feeling insulted, Craig demanded that Karen end the affair immediately, but she continued to date Sunny, genuinely in love. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, it seemed that Karen was ready to leave her husband for a new relationship, a move to another state and secret meetings. After months of scandals, confrontations, and agonizing deliberation, Craig decided that the best solution to save his family would be to move to another state. He began looking for a new job, sending out resumes, and soon landed a position as a water director for a large company in Columbia, Missouri, a city neighboring Kansas. Craig believed that his wife's move to another state would end her affair with Sunny and their family life would return to normal. The move in the summer of 2008 proved difficult for the family, as the children had to change schools, make new friends, and adjust to life in a new city. Although the family was already well off, Craig's salary and his new position was nearly double what he earned in Weatherford. However, with more responsibilities and more hours on the job, Craig naively thought he had cut Sunny out of his wife's life for good. But he was wrong. Karen and Sunny continued to communicate regularly, exchanging calls and texts and meeting in secret. They would drive to meet halfway and spend a couple hours in a roadside hotel before returning home. By then, Karen knew her marriage was doomed. She no longer loved her husband, and divorce was only a matter of time. These secret trysts continued until December 2008. On that New Year's Eve, the Kaler family returned to their hometown to visit family and friends. Sunny was also present at this party. Karen and Sunny behaved low-key at first, simply exchanging greetings. However, as the party progressed and under the influence of alcohol, they seemed to forget about social norms. The lovers were inseparable, holding hands, exchanging longing glances, and some guests even caught them kissing. Craig wasn't just angry, he was furious. Karen had insulted and humiliated him in front of dozens of former roommates, friends, and co-workers, making her affair public. Craig made a scene at the party, verbally attacking his wife and Sunny. An enraged Craig forcibly dragged Karen away from the party. On the way home, he lost control of himself. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her with such force that her dress ripped. He then slapped her, causing her to stumble and fall, hitting her head hard. Divorce and painful harassment. After returning home, the conflict did not subside, and a few days later, Karen told Craig that she was leaving him. She initiated divorce proceedings and demanded custody of the children. At first, Craig tried to apologize, begging to keep the family for the sake of the children and offering to give their marriage another chance. However, Karen was adamant and obtained a divorce. Craig then began calling their mutual friends and relatives, asking them to talk to Karen and convince her not to break up the family and stay with him. Despite his best efforts, she firmly told him that she was leaving for Sunny and was never truly happy in their marriage. In the early spring of 2009, while they were still living under the same roof, another argument broke out, and Craig resorted to physical violence for the first time since that New Year's Eve party. Karen reported him to the police and he was arrested. However, at the station, he claimed that his wife was hysterical and he only held her tightly to calm her down, which caused the bruises on her arms. After this incident, Karen, without waiting for an official divorce, took the children and moved out. For Craig, it was a serious blow, But even more, he was angry when he learned that his daughters sided with their mother, saying that for the first time in a long time saw her happy. He saw this as a betrayal and refused to communicate with Emily and Lauren, only calling Sean and taking him with him on weekends, while blatantly ignoring his daughters. Meanwhile, despite the ongoing divorce proceedings, Craig still hoped that his wife would change her mind and come back to him. He was jealous, tried to control her, and followed her everywhere. He watched her house, followed her around town in a rental car trying to remain undetected, and even tried to set up a hidden camera in her house when no one was there. Naturally, all of this took time and effort, so Craig had to sacrifice work. First he took a vacation, then he claimed that he was sick, and in the end he just started skipping work without explanation. This reckless behavior led to his termination. After losing his job and source of income, Craig was forced to move into his parents' house because he couldn't afford his own. Now, with plenty of free time, he was able to stalk his ex-wife all day long, leading her to take his ex-husband to court to stop him from approaching her. In November 2009, just before Thanksgiving, Karen took her children to visit her 89-year-old grandmother Dorothy White in the small town of Burlingame, Kansas, to spend the vacations. On the evening of November 29th, the Burlingame Police Department received an alarm call about a suspicious van and the sound of gunshots. Dorothy's neighbors reported seeing a small truck pull up to the elderly woman's home, a man get out of it and enter the house. They then allegedly heard screams and gunshots, but are not sure. The man then left the house, got back into the truck, and drove away quickly. Neighbors did not attempt to apprehend him, fearing he was armed. When police pulled up to the house, they were met by a terrified 10-year-old boy calling for help. It was Sean Kaler who couldn't explain what had happened, but it was clear that a terrifying scene awaited the police inside. Near the front door, they found the 89-year-old homeowner lying in a pool of blood and surprisingly alive despite 2 gunshot wounds. In the kitchen, police found the lifeless body of 44-year-old Karen. She had been shot in the chest and then killed by a close-range gunshot to the head. Her ex-husband had left her with no chance of survival. The body of her oldest daughter, 18-year-old Emily, lay between a wall and a couch. She had apparently tried to hide from her enraged father, but he caught up with her and took her life with 2 point-blank shots. Her younger sister, Lauren, lay in a pool of blood in a second-floor bedroom. She was still alive, begging faintly to save her life and repeatedly stating that her father had done it. The elderly woman and Lauren were immediately rushed to the intensive care unit of a nearby hospital. Despite the doctor's best efforts, their lives could not be saved. Lauren died on the morning of December 1st from massive blood loss and damage to her internal organs, and her great-grandmother died a few hours later that day, the only surviving witness. Sean was in a state of shock. Psychologists worked with him, but he needed a thorough interrogation as the only living witness to the tragic events at his great-grandmother's house. He said that that evening his mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and he approached her to ask for his favorite pies. Suddenly the back door of the house swung open and their father entered the house with a shotgun in his hands. Without saying a word, the man pointed the barrel at his ex-wife and shot her, then moved closer and fired again. For the first few seconds, Sean froze in horror. Then his father turned to him, but didn't aim, just silently and intently stared at him. Sean realized he had to run, so he jumped out the open back door. The boy ran toward the main entrance, hoping to alert his grandmother and sisters and call for help. However, as he reached the threshold, he heard several more gunshots. Fearing to enter the house, he hid in a small outbuilding. He heard several more shots and waited in terror for his father to come after him. "Where is Mr. Kaler?" Craig was immediately put on the wanted list, warning that he was armed and extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, police received several reports of a speeding truck, which helped them quickly determine the direction the gunman was traveling. At one point, the man abandoned his vehicle in a wooded area and began walking down a deserted road. Law enforcement quickly caught up with him and apprehended him the next morning. He had left the rifle and ammunition in the back seat, with prescription medication for depression and anxiety disorders lying next to the driver's seat. Mr. Kaler did not resist arrest. He did not seem to care anymore. He looked confused and even frightened, and honestly admitted that he was armed with a gun and a hunting knife, but did not intend to use them. He also admitted that he had done something terrible that he believed the police already knew about. At first, when he was taken to the police station, Craig fully admitted his guilt and poured his heart out to the investigating officer. He told how his wife had cheated on him with Sonny, how they had humiliated him in front of his friends at a New Year's Eve party, how his attempts to save his marriage had cost him his job, and what was left of his self-respect. The man cried, said he did not know how he had decided to take such a step, and complained that everyone, including his daughters, had betrayed him. Trial and fair sentence. Craig's trial began in December 2010. The defendant, who was advised by his lawyer Thomas Heaney, recanted his initial confession, blaming his actions on mental illness and insanity. It was his only option to avoid the death penalty for the murder of 4 people. Heaney tried to convince the court that his client was in a difficult psycho-emotional state after his wife left him for a lover. His children sided with their mother. He lost his job and was forced to move back into his parents' home. All of these factors contributed to the breakdown, the lawyer said, and Mr. Kaler committed the crime while insane, not realizing what he was doing. Prior to 1995, there was indeed a law that allowed criminals to get leniency by pleading insanity. However, in Kansas, where the crime was committed and the trial took place, that law was repealed. Furthermore, the prosecution found no evidence of insanity or affective state in Craig's actions. Only cold calculation. He purchased guns and ammunition in advance, went to Dorothy White's house, knowing that his entire family was there. He shot each victim twice, leaving no chance of survival. However, he deliberately spared his son, Sean, allowing him to escape. In August 2011, the man was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. Sean, who was 12 years old at the time, testified at the final hearing. He said that he did not wish his father dead, as he was the only close relative left. Despite numerous appeals by Craig and his attorneys, the verdict remained unchanged. As of today, Mr. Kohler is still in prison and continues to fight to have the case reviewed and the death sentence overturned. As for Sean, after the death of his mother and sisters, he was officially taken into custody by his maternal grandmother. He is now an adult, has finished school, received an education, and has decided to stay and work in his home state. This story began on a Saturday evening in July 2011, during a dance lesson when Joseph Saunier, a respected and wealthy pathologist, first met Rochelle Tina, a single man, famous in his city and beyond, enjoying freedom, status, and money, and a beautiful, sweet woman, almost 10 years younger than Joseph, successful and living a life of pleasure. Meeting on the dance floor was the beginning of their story, which unfortunately ended in tragedy. At that moment, when the ideal partnership in the dance grew into a tender and passionate romance, no one could not even imagine what events would follow after a while. The biography of Joseph Saunier, before meeting Rochelle, is a path full of joys and tragedies. Born in 1955 in a respected family of doctors in Shreveport, Louisiana, Joseph from childhood dreamed of continuing the work of the family and become a doctor. With outstanding abilities, the young man earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science cum laude from the University of Baton Rouge in 1976. He then applied to Louisiana State University in Shreveport and began working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. The young man perfectly combined his university studies and work. Wanting to achieve professionalism in his chosen activity, he constantly took additional workload at the university and honed his knowledge and practice at the hospital. The management noticed the success and zeal of the young employee, and in the last year of training he received the position of chief resident. Upon completion of his studies, Joseph chose the field of pathologic anatomy, later becoming a respected pathologist and laboratory director in Lubbock, Texas. Joseph's life was marked by the tragic loss of the woman he loved. His marriage, which lasted 27 years and which he considered happy, ended in divorce. His wife fell in love with another man. Joseph accepted her choice and agreed to divorce, believing that the man he loved had found his happiness. Dr. Saunier had a strong character and a great sense of nobility and responsibility. After the divorce, he maintained a very warm relationship with Becky and continued to support his 2 sons, showing resilience and strength of character. When Becky died 2 years later at the hands of her new husband Joseph, shocked by the heinous death of his former spouse, once again experienced a wave of grief and loss. He repeatedly recalled the family years gone by and mourned the loss. However, the doctor remained a pillar for the family. He immediately took over all the organizational issues and funeral expenses and helped his sons to survive the trauma. The children later admitted that it was his support that helped each of them overcome the pain. The tragedy left a deep mark on Joseph's heart. For a while, he fully devoted himself to work and the upbringing of 2 sons. Later, the grief he experienced led to a reassessment of life. The man decided to start a personal chapter in a new city and with a new woman. In 2007, Dr. Sonner moved with his sons from Dallas to Lubbock, Texas, where he accepted a position as chief pathologist at Covenant Health System. Feeling the need for something new to refresh him and fill the void inside, Joseph enrolled in a local dance studio. He enjoyed the classes also because it was a place where he met different women. A couple of times he even tried unsuccessfully to build relationships with his dance partners. And then one warm summer evening, Rochelle Tina appeared at the dance class. Elegant, graceful, refined woman with a sense of humor and lively eyes attracted Dr. Sonner's attention at first sight. Her smile lit up the room and Joseph realized she was exactly who he was looking for. Rochelle, for her part, also noticed the confident and respectful man moving deftly on the dance floor. Rochelle, 47, and Joseph, 57, paired up, complementing each other perfectly in the dance. With each new session, they realized they were growing closer. Dr. Sonner suggested dating and Rochelle agreed. Thus began a new, as it seemed at the time, happy chapter in the lives of both of them. Rochelle had an attractive and innate charm that had such a strong influence on men that they were willing to change their lives, destroy marriages, and commit criminal acts for her. Rochelle was one of those women who have a unique magnetism, attract attention, and cause passion. Such are called fatal women. Joseph and Rochelle's paths would not cross until a July evening because she had previously lived in Amarillo, a couple hours by car from Lubbock. In fact, they were both starting a new life with a clean slate after personal love dramas. Leaving Amarillo, Dr. Sonner's new lover was running away from the fear and anxiety associated with Mike Dixon, owner of a private clinic in plastic surgery and cosmetology. The woman met Mike in 2008 when she came in for Botox injections. Initially, there was a purely friendly communication, then a slight flirtation after a spark between them and began a romance. Rochelle was a free, accomplished woman. For a long time, she worked as an executive in the NFL, built a successful career, and did not need anything. For children are grown. She owed no one anything. Unlike Mike, who was bound by the bonds of marriage, a plastic surgeon began leading a double life. A few months later, his wife found out about the affair and filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Mike was so infatuated with Rochelle that he almost did not notice how a huge stage of his life ended. He decisively separated from his wife. For Rochelle, who had never claimed to be married to Mike, an exciting affair from which she wanted only joy and ease turned into a union that required her to be just as maniacally obsessed with her partner. Not getting the attention he expected, Mike tried to pressure Rochelle, which only served to scare her away. Seeing the manipulation and the desire to completely control her life, the young woman decided to part with the plastic surgeon, and in 2010, the paths of former lovers parted. Nevertheless, even after the breakup, Mike for a long time pursued Rochelle, urging her to return. His obsession exceeded all healthy boundaries, forcing Rochelle to decide to move to disappear from his sight and free herself from his oppressive influence. That's how Rochelle found herself in Lubbock, intent on starting a new life. Dr. Sonner and the beautiful, cheerful partner quickly hit it off. Gradually, their relationship grew into true love. Sons and relatives willingly accepted the new lover and were happy for Joseph. The man spared nothing for her, showered her with gifts, invited to the best restaurants and private clubs in the city, took her on trips. After Joseph realized that he finally found a worthy woman with whom he was ready to tie his life, he took her to Los Angeles, and in the presence of his entire family, made a proposal. At that moment, Rochelle was 47 years old, and she was literally crazy about her new man. Her personal page in social networks was filled almost daily with love confessions to Joseph. Of course, Mike Dixon couldn't help but see these confessions. The former lover was emotionally shocked to learn that Rochelle not only meets with a new man, but also openly confesses his love and is going to marry him. He realized that it would not be possible to get his former friend back, but he dared to offer her to resume the former format of meetings and become at least lovers. The idea to form a love triangle did not find a response. Rochelle firmly rejected the proposal and told Joseph about everything. After a while, the couple began to feel that they were being watched. At one point, they even noticed something resembling a camera flash through the backyard window, but they didn't pay much attention to it, not fully realizing the seriousness of the problem. The situation spiraled out of control on July 11, 2012. A landscaper who had arrived at the doctor's home to discuss an upcoming remodel contacted emergency services. Upon arriving at the customer's home, he attempted to contact the owner but received no response. The man noticed an open door and, assuming Joseph might not be able to hear him, went inside. He saw the house in disarray, and most disturbing was the presence of a bullet hole near the front door, indicating a possible intruder. The designer cautiously walked further inside in search of the homeowner and then examined the garage, where he found Joseph Saunier lying in a pool of blood on the floor with no signs of life. The doctor's body bore evidence of stab and gunshot wounds. Concluding that the perpetrator might be somewhere nearby, the designer immediately left the house and summoned help by telephone. At 2:48 in the afternoon, the police department received a call and several patrol cars were immediately dispatched to the scene. Arriving officers found the victim of the crime, identified as Joseph Saunier, a 57-year-old pathologist. Medics confirmed the death of his colleague. The incident shocked the public as it occurred in one of the city's most peaceful, safe, and upscale neighborhoods with virtually zero crime. Dr. Saunier, a member of a respected profession, was known for his calmness and kindness and had no apparent enemies willing to harm him. Although a window had been broken, what had happened was not a robbery, for nothing was missing from the house. A bottle with the bottom shot through was found at the scene. It appeared to have been used as an improvised silencer for a firearm. A short time later, a forensic team arrived to collect evidence for examination. Apparently, the assailant was inexperienced as he left ample traces at the scene. DNA collected from the bottle used as a silencer and blood samples found were sent to a lab for further testing. Neighbors interviewed by detectives claimed they did not see or hear anything suspicious. There were no CCTV cameras near the house. According to the investigation, the perpetrator entered the house using a panoramic window overlooking the backyard, a circumstance that made his attack unexpected. In the dining room, the attacker confronted his victim and began shooting. It was most likely at this point that the wine bottle was used as a silencer. Judging by the traces of blood left in the hallway, the doctor was still alive after the shots were fired. He went into the garage, where the attacker caught up with him and stabbed the victim a number of times. An autopsy on the body found 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. The circumstances indicated that the murder was not a random crime. What remained unclear was who had done it and why. The investigation focused on the pathologist's close social circle. During an interview with law enforcement, the victim's fiancé recounted strange events in her and Joseph's life in the last months before the tragedy. According to her, it appeared that Dr. Saunier was being stalked. In addition, Rochelle herself had seen a stranger standing in front of Joseph's house watching the door and windows. She also described persistent calls and texts that began to be received by her fiancé just prior to his death. Officers verified the information, but believed the calls and messages came from other women with whom Joseph appeared to be in a parallel relationship, as there were witnesses who said the man was in contact with several women at once. Investigators asked Rochelle if she was aware of the other women. She answered that she was not. Joseph's sons denied the possibility that their father could have had mistresses, as cheating is not in the character of their father. However, investigators continued to develop a version of the crime motivated by jealousy. At the next interrogation, Rochelle could not withstand the pressure, cried and admitted that she knew several women, probably involved in the crime. According to her, several former girlfriends were constantly stalking Joseph. He ignored them, but they never stopped expressing their displeasure about his future wedding. One of them turned out to be a lady from Florida, who continued to persistently call and write even after Dr. Saunier revealed his serious relationship with Rochelle. Another was a nurse, a colleague of the pathologist, who also called and wrote to him regularly. The third was a woman with a daughter who, shortly before the murder, had sent a letter to Joseph, accusing him of abandoning her and her child. At the same interview, Rochelle mentioned Mike Dixon for the first time. Until then, she hadn't connected the surveillance of her and Joseph to Mike, since Mike had completely stopped paying attention after her refusal to become a mistress. She assumed he had accepted her marriage and moved on with his life. The police had a viable suspect and they went to talk to the plastic surgeon. Mike willingly went to talk to the detectives. He admitted that he had indeed been deeply in love with Rochelle and had divorced his wife in the name of that love in an effort to create an opportunity for their future together. He admitted that the separation was a blow to him, and for some time he tried to get Rochelle back. She remained adamant, however, and he eventually relented and found a new woman considerably younger than himself. His new girlfriend, a medical student, confirmed his alibi, as Mike was at work at the time of the crime and then spent time with her. The investigation ran into difficulties. All the suspects, including Rochelle herself, had incontrovertible alibis. Detectives tried to identify possible enemies of the murdered or people financially interested in his death, but no new figures were found. By the time the lab results came back, the situation appeared to be a dead end. The forensic results, unfortunately, did not add any clarity. The DNA sample from the bottle did not belong to the victim. However, the police database was unable to determine whose sample was found at the crime scene. And that's when law enforcement officials got unusually lucky. The police department received a call from Paul Reynolds, an aspiring EMT from Amarillo. According to him, he was sharing housing with a buddy named Dave Shepard, who had recently confessed to a murder committed in Lubbock, after which he attempted to take his own life, but was rescued. Paul relayed information that a neighbor had told him details of the crime, including specific details that only a small circle of detectives might have known, such as the use of a bottle muffler. The officers realized that Shepard was indeed involved in the crime. A witness who called claimed that Dave was only the perpetrator, and that the person who ordered the crime was an unknown doctor associated with plastic surgery. Officers immediately began running a background check on the new suspect and found that Shepard had a violent criminal history with theft and hooliganism, but no major crimes. They determined that he was divorced, unemployed, and had been caught stealing on several occasions, including one where he stole $30,000 from a prominent businessman. Dave was taken to the station for questioning, and pretty quickly he began to confess, confirming that Mike Dixon had indeed hired him to commit the crime. According to Dave, the meeting with the plastic surgeon took place in a bar where both found themselves going through painful breakups with their partners. Under the influence of alcohol, the casual conversation turned into a true friendship. Mike Dixon told a sad love story, complained about Rochelle, who had left him and was now about to marry someone else. The man shared that he can't get over his former partner and is willing to do anything to get her back. Deciding that the only obstacle is Dr. Saunier, Mike and Dave devise a plan. However, their intentions, according to Dave, did not include murder. They simply wanted to slander the pathologist so that proud Rochelle would leave him and want to return to Mike. First of all, they found women who were paid handsome sums of money, $1,000 each, to play the role of mistresses and pursue Saunier. Then came a letter from a woman with a child claiming that Joseph had abandoned her. Dr. Saunier denied it each time, and Rochelle believed him. It also turned out that the camera flash the couple had seen was the light from Dave's cell phone flashlight, who regularly drove to their house and played up the surveillance. Each such trip was financed by Mike Dixon, handing out money for gas and related expenses. When spying and slander failed to separate the lovers, Mike set out to fix the problem in a radical way. He told his friend that he wanted him to kill the pathologist. As payment, Dixon offered 3 silver bars totaling about $10,000. Dave agreed. One of the bars given as a deposit, the hired killer immediately cashed in at a pawn shop. According to Dave Shepard, when he arrived at Dr. Sonier's house, things got out of control. It was an unintentional shooting. I got scared and he started walking away down the hallway. When I came to my senses from the shock, I shouted, "Dr. Sonier, are you all right?" Hearing nothing back, I followed him into the garage. He was lying there flat. I distinctly heard his last breath and I bent down to check his pulse. There was no pulse. In his confession, Shepard claimed that he allegedly stabbed Joseph Sonier in an irrational and foolish attempt to cover up what he called involuntary manslaughter. "I stabbed him a couple times. I don't remember how many times." "You say I stabbed 11 times? I had Dr. Sonier's phone in my hand and I thought about dialing the emergency number to call for help. But I didn't. Maybe that's why 11 times. I put the phone back, mutilated the remains, then I went to Mike's, got the rest of the bullion and tried to kill myself." According to Dave, agreeing to the crime, he did not understand what he was agreeing to, and when he found himself in front of Joseph, he realized that he could not kill. Had it not been for an accidental gunshot, Dr. Sonier would still be alive. The plastic surgeon was apprehended by police the same day on charges of first-degree murder based on Dave's testimony and an extensive body of other evidence, including compromising phone calls and text messages containing explicit confessions. At the first interview, detectives hoped to elicit a confession, but Mike Dixon stubbornly denied everything, demanding an attorney. A lawsuit ensued. Dave Shepard, as part of a deal with the prosecutor, immediately pleaded guilty to his role as a hired criminal and waived the right to appeal the sentence. As a result, instead of the death penalty, he received a life sentence without parole. Mike Dixon, against whom there was only circumstantial evidence, pleaded not guilty. Unexpectedly, Dave, who was a key witness for the prosecution, testified during the trial that he committed the crime on his own, without any involvement of Dixon in it. Under oath, he said that the silver bars were intended for investment in a business the two of them had intended to start. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a retrial was declared. The second trial took place in 2016. Dixon was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. An appeal filed by his lawyers led to the reversal of the judgment. The man was released on bail in the amount of $2 million. But the fight for justice did not end. The prosecutor's office sought to have the sentence reinstated by the highest criminal court of the state. Otherwise, a third trial was to be held. The prosecutor's office's motion, filed on February 11, 2019, was granted. In April 2020, the bail was revoked, and an arrest warrant was again issued. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reversed the lower court's decision and reinstated Mike Dixon's sentence. The judge ruled that the felon must continue to serve his life sentence without parole. Mike Dixon is currently incarcerated in a prison in Lubbock, Texas. Dr. Joseph Sonier became part of the love triangle when he began dating Rochelle in July 2011. The woman still calls him the main love of her life, and regrets that she unknowingly led a criminal to a noble, loving, and honest man. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about, or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.